Due to their huge impact on the very fabric of gaming, the cast of Street Fighter can be found all over the place across a range of titles and genres. On this channel in the past we have already looked at all of the Marvel vs Capcom games and the company's crossovers with both SNK and Tatsunoko. But today we are going to be looking at a crossover title where the playable roster of Street Fighter took on perhaps their greatest rivals in the fighting game field in the last 25 years. Or perhaps of all time for that matter. In this video we are going to be looking at the history of how this dream matchup came to fruition, what players can experience if they pick this one up, and reflect back on this game's overall impact and legacy. Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am the Top Hat Gaming Man, aka Big Daddy Top Hat, and this is the mad story of Street Fighter X Tekken, the Goliath crossover that failed. Yeah! Street Fighter, the granddaddy of them all, the traditional fighting game franchise that in many ways pioneered the entire genre. The second entry in the series, Street Fighter 2, would captivate the imagination of planet Earth, putting the wheels in motion for one of the most successful franchises ever. The game pretty much defined one-on-one fighting games, with its large playable roster, colourful stage backdrops, varied character movesets, and the fact that two friends could even fight one another to establish who was the best. This game is often held responsible for rejuvenating the entire arcade industry in 1991 and would even be the catalyst that got many people into console gaming in the first place. Street Fighter enjoyed a good run as top dog, competing against the likes of Mortal Kombat, Fatal Fury and Killer Instinct. But Capcom's Street Fighter remained the king of fighters in most consumers' minds, and commercially the most successful of them all by the mid-90s. By the latter part of the decade though, the fighting game franchise that was garnering the most mass market attention was a property from Namco known as Tekken. So, what were these games doing that was so special that would allow the games to steal Street Fighter's limelight? Well, firstly, combat in Tekken took place featuring 3D polygon models. The franchise was first created under the leadership of Seiichi Ishii, one of the creators of Virtua Fighter, who used his experience from working on this prior project to help create an even more refined fighting game experience. Street Fighter on the other hand, with its Alpha series and later Street Fighter 3, opted to remain using 2D sprites, due to Capcom having greater expertise in producing such a game, and the fact that it could be argued that 2D games offered better hit detection and reaction times to what could be accomplished in 3D at that time. This would mean that Street Fighter would remain a favourite with the more hardcore members of the fighting game niche, but Tekken was certainly getting more attention from the general public. In fact, Capcom would outsource the Street Fighter license in 1996 to Eureka, who would develop their own polygon Street Fighter game. But by this point in time, we were only a few months away from Tekken 3, which both graphically and gameplay wise was arguably in a different ballpark to EX. Speaking of gameplay, that was another element that made the Tekken franchise so popular. While Street Fighter was a game that was intuitive enough to essentially be played by anyone, Tekken took this concept a step further, making this game even more accessible to fighting game beginners. Basically, most traditional fighting games are usually played with buttons which correspond to the strength of the attack, such as a strong punch or weak kick. Tekken, however, dedicates a button to each of the four limbs of a fighter. Characters can also automatically block while not moving forward, overall meaning even toddlers could get a lot of enjoyment out of these games. I feel another element that made Tekken so popular was the amount of reward players would receive every time they played through a single player campaign with a different fighter. Not only would players be rewarded with different pre-rendered cinematic cutscenes at the end of each playthrough, which was a big deal at the time, but they would also get to face off against a secret fighter prior to taking on the final boss. These secret fighters would become playable after completing each playthrough, giving the game a ton of replayability as players would want to unlock the vast array of characters and see every cool ending these games had to offer. As a teenager in the late 90s, due to Tekken, I felt that Street Fighter would end up being remembered as a craze, like say, the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers or Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles. I, much like many others, assumed that Tekken had permanently taken its throne, especially by the time Tekken Tag Tournament was released as a PS2 launch game. the title completely crushed Street Fighter EX3 in terms of marketing appeal. In fact, Tekken is remembered as one of the greatest franchises across both the PlayStation 1 and PS2, two of the most successful consoles of all time. The franchise is synonymous with the rise of both. By Tekken Tag, Street Fighter had been pummeled so badly by the rise of this fighting game, and of course Capcom's own mismanagement, that there would be no more Street Fighter games for a number of years past this point. In fact, despite the PS2 existing on the market for over a decade, it would not receive another new Street Fighter game after EX3, which is insane really. In the mid-2000s though, Street Fighter 2 would get popular again in the Xbox Live Arcade. This in turn would inspire Capcom enough to task Yoshinori Ono with the development of Street Fighter 4, a 2008 game that would rejuvenate the Street Fighter brand once more, going on to become the best-selling Street Fighter game since Street Fighter 2, putting Capcom at the top of the fighting game food chain once again. That same year, Namco would release Tekken 6, a game that would receive favourable reviews, but got nowhere near the same level of love as that of Street Fighter 4. Street Fighter was legitimately on top again in every sense. Now, considering all the crossover games Street Fighter characters had been involved in, a showdown with the cast of Tekken was a dream scenario gamers had fantasised about over the years. Prior to an EVO tournament in 2010, Street Fighter 4 producer Yoshinori Ono was teasing a yet-to-be-announced game, which most people initially believed was going to be a new Darkstalkers game. However, prior to the finals of the EVO event, on the stage Yoshinori Ono was confronted by Tekken's current producer Katsuhiro Harada, who would tease fans with the potential of a Street Fighter Tekken game for the first time. Later that same year, the game would be officially announced at Comic-Con, where, during a Super Street Fighter 4 panel, Harada would appear out of the crowd giving out free copies of Tekken 6 to those in attendance, which would comically be met to a mix of cheers and boos. At this event, which kind of reminds me of the Monday Night Wars, Ono and Harada would officially confirm the existence of Street Fighter X Tekken, going on to show off both a teaser trailer of the game and early game footage of the title. At this point in time, Namco and Capcom were no strangers to working alongside each other, as Street Fighter X Tekken would be the second collaborative project between the two companies, with the Japan-only Namco X Capcom game also being released in partnership prior, which we may take a look at properly in the future. In Street Fighter X Tekken's case, Namco's main involvement was simply the licensing of the Tekken cast, whereas the game's actual development on consoles was handled by Capcom and Dimps, much like Street Fighter 4. This in turn would mean that the game would be developed to feature mechanics more in common with Street Fighter, with Harada mentioning at Comic-Con that Namco would be releasing their own fighting game using the licenses, which sadly still has not seemed to have come to fruition. But at least we got the Capcom produced game, eh? So let's take a look at that one. This crossover fighting game, first released for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 in March of 2012, obviously lets players take control of fighters from both Street Fighter and Tekken. Like in all of Capcom's previous crossover fighting games, combat takes place involving tag team matches players, in this game's case featuring 2-on-2 action. Speaking of tags, this form of play is no strange to the Tekken franchise either, especially when you consider that Tekken Tag was one of the games that helped launch the PS2, so the tag format fits the game like a glove. During these tag bouts, players can take advantage of a switch system, allowing players to switch out characters even mid-combo, which can be carried into juggle or super art moves fairly fluidly. Interestingly, despite this actually being a Capcom game, rounds are not won by KOing each member of your opponent's team, like in Capcom's other crossover games, but simply by managing to knock out one of your opponent's characters, just like in Tekken Tag Tournament, meaning that different strategies are needed to be applied to win bouts in this game from the likes of Marvel vs Capcom 3, which was released just 1 year prior. This was a good choice though, as it both differentiates the gameplay and makes this Street Fighter mechanic heavy title a little more Tekken-like. Completely new to this game and not seen in anything Street Fighter or Tekken related before is a feature known as Pandora mode. Basically, all or nothing moves that are only executable at the last possible moment. Kind of like desperation moves seen in SNK games. Essentially, if a player is losing badly, Pandora mode is an effective way to turn the tide, giving players a last breath of hope to turn things around. In terms of new additions, the game's biggest feature is probably gems. The game contains two main types of gems. The first of these are boost gems that can be used to boost attack, defense or speed over the course of a contest, and there are assist gems which allow passive additions such as allowing for auto blocks or cancels, which are triggered at the cost of some of the game's cross gauge. These gems are selected from the menu prior to a bout. Now, regarding the gems, according to IGN, prior to the game's release in regards to this feature, gems were a huge point of contention for Street Fighter X Tekken's fighting fanbase. Many players worried that introducing the passive assist system would disrupt the game's balance, making so a less skilled player could defeat a more experienced one due to some well-placed gems. In regards to these gems, all in all it is reported that, on the whole, the boost gems are appreciated for adding to the game's formula, increasing the strategy required and fun that can be had, whereas assist gems tend to hinder the player more than anything due to using up the cross gauge at too fast a pace. Either way, they are not a game-breaking feature like some fans had feared. Speaking of these gems, a number of different gem packs were sold with this game at launch, many of which were exclusive to certain store distribution chains. In fact, Capcom were hoping that this game would make such a splash that many fans would be stupid enough to purchase gems separately through microtransactions. Imagine being that much of a twat though that you were willing to pay extra money just so you can win. It is also worth noting that the game takes advantage of the traditional 6-button Street Fighter system, which was not common with Capcom games at the time, as on the whole their direction appeared to revolve around simplifying things. However, in this game's case it tries to be a little bit more like Street Fighter of old, at least in terms of the button layout. Interestingly, the Tekken characters in this game can pull off Tekken style combos primarily using 4 buttons, integrating these two franchises together further. Old Street Fighter elements are included, such as super arts, EX attacks, cancels and super combos, which are executable using the 3-section meter known as the cross gauge, which we have touched on briefly a few times already. As mentioned earlier, Street Fighter X Tekken is yet another game featuring tag team gameplay. Switching between characters at the right time is key to winning matches. Switch cancels can be used to switch partners mid-combos, whilst cross-rush combos allow players to launch an opponent up into the air prior to swapping partners to then continue a combo. There are even cross-arts allowing players to chain their characters' super combos together into one attack. Players also have the ability to control both of their teammates using the cross-assault mechanic, which is executable until the cross-gauge runs dry. Now, when it comes to fighting games, the roster of fighters selectable is often one of the most interesting elements included within these games. The base roster of this game contained 38 playable characters, 19 from each of the 2 companies' different universes. The PlayStation 3 version of the game would even get some characters added as free DLC from other Namco and Capcom franchises, such as Namco's Pac-Man and Capcom's Mega Man. They were both added to the roster. You may notice that hilariously and disturbingly that this was no regular Mega Man for this game either. Instead, it was the American NES box art Mega Man, which may perhaps be my favourite fighting game character of all time. More strange additions to the PS3 version would include Cole McGrath from Sucker Punch's infamous series, and Sony's mascots Toro and his rival Kuro, 2 cat characters who, whilst not popular or even particularly known in the West, are apparently big in Japan. Now, across both the PS3 and Xbox 360, a further 12 characters would be added to the lineup as paid DLC, who were made up of well-known fighters from both Street Fighter and Tekken. Now, this is where we run into a little controversy. We have mentioned on here plenty of times how Capcom were getting perpetually more greedy when it came to profiting from microtransactions over this period. Now, when it comes to DLC fighters placed in this game, the crime is not developing content at a later date for gamers to buy into, which is what DLC in my opinion should be all about. But the DLC in this game's case was pre-made content that was made prior to the game's launch, that was locked behind a paywall for players to access. To make matters worse, you could argue that gamers had already paid for these 12 characters, as reportedly all 12 fighters were on the disc. Gamers were just not allowed to use them unless they paid Capcom an additional fee. The inclusion of characters on the disc that can only be used by paying more resulted in criticism from fans and publishers. Capcom would respond to this criticism by claiming they were actually doing their fans a favour by releasing DLC this way, as fans would not have to use up any hard drive space whatsoever when making the purchase. Still though, I think this is a pretty dirty move by Capcom, which certainly did not go unnoticed. Putting Capcom's corporate greed to one side though, the game was fairly well received at the time, with IGN giving the verdict that Street Fighter X Tekken maintains the general look of the recently released Super Street Fighter 4, meaning that Yoshinori Ono era look, with heavily stylised character models and bright flashy super moves, is well intact. It's great to see the wide range of Tekken characters presented in the same comic book vein. GameSpot would like this game too, stating Street Fighter X Tekken provides complex combat in an inviting package. The fighting genre needs to become accessible to a wider range of players, and this game takes an important step in the right direction. Accessibility that doesn't come at the expense of variety is a smart move and sets this fun and flashy fighter apart from the pack. Games Radar called this another fast, fun and technical Capcom fighting experience. Game Informer claimed that moderate to hardcore players are going to find a lot to absorb in Street Fighter X Tekken, and players with patience will be rewarded for it. And Eurogamer wrote, this ripped, boisterous crossover game arrives in a blaze of creativity, one of an intensity rarely seen in Japanese game output of late. A fierce, passionate marriage then, by one that just might last. Despite a touch of controversy here and there, and some pretty damn good reviews, sadly for Capcom, the game did not deliver on the financial level they wanted, shifting just over 1.7 million copies by March of 2014. But how on earth did a game economically fail featuring two of the biggest fighting game franchises ever facing off? Well, Capcom themselves put it down to the old chestnut of why Street Fighter fell out of favour in the first place during the end of the 90s. They placed the blame on there once again being too many fighters, stating that the game's poor performance may be in part due to cannibalism of the fighting game genre, meaning too many fighting games were released in too short a time. The commercial lack of success this game has received could help explain why Tekken, Cross Street Fighter in development by Namco, has still never seen the light of day, despite being announced over 10 years ago. Interestingly, in May of 2019, Harada stated that he still wants to release the game, but his logical and business sense has him questioning whether he actually should. In December 2019, Harada posted a poll on his Twitter account asking the community how much they still were waiting for the game, meaning that there is still some hope yet that we will receive another crossover between these brands, but it is certainly looking doubtful. Let me know in the comment section down below whether you think Namco should develop Tekken Cross Street Fighter, whether you would purchase it, and whether or not you think there are any other factors that led to Street Fighter X Tekken selling badly other than there being too many fighting games released in quick succession. I'll be curious to hear your thoughts. If you are new here, make sure you like, subscribe and hit the notification bell to make sure you receive videos like this in your subscription feed every week. This long deep dive video and others are only possible due to the backing this channel receives over on Patreon. If you want to vote on what content I produce, get your name in the credits, and receive all of these videos before everyone else, consider backing this channel over on Patreon. You'll receive plenty of additional incentives for as little as just $1 a month. It all counts and it all helps. So huge thanks to the lifeblood of this channel. Special shout outs go out to Sebastian Velez, Carl Johnson, Heyo Paulo Lopez, Joseph Rasmick, Doug Perkins, Ryan Dinched, Evan Border, Philip Mamp, Camber 82, A Murder of Crows, Aswell Rakai, Keith Ferguson, Joaquin Varela, Prince Knight, Matthew Robertson, Michael Cullix, Ego Jordan Durant, TOG Driver, Angel Light 85, Alethea Swanson, Timothy W. Haskins II, Nick Daniels, Princess Zana, Carlos Domingos, Sponge Matt B, Glenny Glenn, Daniel Daly, Computer Man, House of the Ted, Sobby Quang DX, Gary Pinkett, ECU Professor, Instant Gratification Monkey, James Bishop, JB, Post DXL, Michael Hall, Baba Kitty, Ron Stud, Big Wobblers, Langston Miller, Noob, Casey Wright, Zai, Brian Barry, Luke Canava, Salagny, Chris Margarine, Stephen Lewis, Sarah Powell, Flaming Renee, Sarai H. Al Sarai, Marvin Araliga, Chris Cool, Punky Dudestar, Matthew Rindle, Adrian Hannington, Bernard NG, Marco Soto, Andrew Pearson, Richard Stu Stewart, James McDonald, Jazzy Tay, Crazy Yal, Master Jinx, Hans Christian, Time Lord Soundwave, Dan Van Dam, Adam Castin, Gregory Smarajewicz, Rick67, Louis Viant, John Bates, David Ball, Angry Little SOB, Mike Bruno, Anders Reinsbergs, Chris Fisk, Evan M, Paul Elliott, Me Machine Dean Joel, Antonio Rodriguez, Dan Barlow Jr., Craig Jenkins, Tom Elliott, RetroAversion.com, Since Spaces, Andrew Bazansky, and all of my other patrons. Thank you for making running this YouTube channel just that little bit easier. And thank you for watching these videos. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Cheers.